Welcome back to One More Mana. My name's Derik, and today we are getting into another deck tech. Now, this deck I am so excited to talk about. This is one of my personal decks that I've been playing for about a month now. Been tweaking it a ton. I've teased it quite a few times, so if you've been watching the streams or anything, you might have an idea of what it is. I've taken this real deep interest recently in non-green lands decks, or non-green land theme decks. And there's a few that I've been working on. A couple are going to get deck techs, but this first one is just so much fun, and it is Noyan Dar Royal Shaper. Now, if you want any of the amazing cards in this deck, or you just love Merfolk like I do and just want to get a Noyan Dar for funsies, head on over to TCG Player. TCG Player is amazing. Anything you could want, you can find on there. Any sort of art styles, foiling, whatever it is, and especially with all the new crazy Strixhaven stuff and some of those insane arts that are going to be coming out soon, definitely check out TCG Player. And anything you get with the affiliate link down below in the description will help support the channel. We really do appreciate all the help. But now let's just jump into Noyan Dar. This is such an interesting card, and I've been wanting to build this card for the longest time and can just not get a functional deck list together. So Noyan Dar is 3, a white and a blue, for a 4/4 Merfolk that basically you play an instant or sorcery, throw 3+1/+1 counters onto a land that becomes a 0/0 elemental, and it gains haste. So this whole deck is an instant sorcery lands matter deck where you're trying to punch people with lands, and it is just convoluted enough for something that I love. It is so much fun. The coolest thing about this deck, as opposed to a lot of other lands decks, really care about lands entering or leaving, where you're trying to ramp super hard, get all these lands out. This deck, obviously you're in Azorius, so we can't ramp by sorcery based ramp for the most part. We care more about having really interesting lands than just having a ton of them. So it's going to be a spell slinger style deck where you're trying to punch people, which again, basically every deck I build, at some point punching someone has to be involved, so clearly that's going to be a focus on this as well. There are a couple different directions that you can take this. Either way, you want to be super instant or sorcery heavy, and we'll get into that once we get into the categories. But you can go very control heavy, and it can be built kind of similar to where you see Talrand lists, where super counterspell heavy, super control-y, where you're basically trying to control the board and use those lands as finishers. I went more in a direction of playing tons of cantrips and weird instant speed spells for card advantage and things, so you can get massive scary lands and just enough counterspells and such to keep your commander safe as opposed to trying to control the board. But that's kind of just whatever place you feel most comfortable in. Either way, as we go through the categories, you'll see the crazy stuff this deck is about to do, and I think even for people that don't typically like Azorius, because that's not my typical color combination, I think you'll find a lot of fun things to do in the deck. We'll start with the creatures because there are barely any. I mentioned this deck is very instant and sorcery based. You want to have between like 40 and 50 instants and sorceries most times, like an insane amount. So every other category is very, we just got to pick the best of the best or whatever our favorite is, because that's all we got room for. So in the creature slot, the one of the creatures I just couldn't cut, the ones I had to have, was Weathered Wayfarer. This card is just too good in this deck just because you can tutor for any land. We're in Azorius, so somebody's going to have more lands than us. And when we get into the lands, a lot of our win cons are based on tutoring for very specific lands, and this is just such a powerful card to have in here. We really can't. It makes the deck, it's a significant power drop if we don't have it in there, just because there's not a ton of tutors we're playing, so this is one of few where we can really get what we need. Another card that just does so much work is Herald of Secret Streams. Normally this would be something I just save for the game-winning step, because it basically just makes all our lands unblockable, but it is something I think that works as utility. In this deck, when you play it out, there's multiple ways to go about whether you want to spread the counters amongst multiple lands or you just want to make one giant land. And this can kind of tie into that, whether we want to go the wide or tall approach. It's going to vary game to game, but this will allow us to get damage through either way. But the creature that I think, to me, was the most important outside of the Weathered Wayfarer is going to be Giver of Runes. I really think protecting your commander is so crucial in this deck, because a 5 CMC commander in Azorius, where a deck is this commander dependent, is insane. When we get it out, if it gets killed once, 7 mana, and we want to be able to cast instants and sorceries to then buff up lands, you get into a weird spot where all of a sudden you can play your commander, no mana left up, it gets killed again, and then all of a sudden you got all these cantrips and everything. They don't really do a ton. So we do want to pick and choose when we get our commander, and we feel a whole lot safer if Giver of Runes is there to help protect it. Now with the artifacts, we are just going ramp heavy, ramp crazy. We want all the mana rocks we can get. I particularly love Skyclave Relic and Darksteel Ingot in this deck because indestructible is important. We want to, when we ramp and get ahead with our rocks, we don't want them to just be blown up. Now I'm sure if you wanted to optimize this, because we're again outside of green with a 5 CMC commander, you know, the Mana Crypts, Mana Vaults, all that stuff would be great. This deck is not trying to be super competitive or super strong the way I built it. I just want it to be fun. So I didn't go like fast mana route. I just went the typical mana rocks, the soul rings, the dark steel ingots, commander spheres, and just loaded it with that. It's a lot more budget friendly. And to be honest, it does just fine. We're not really trying to race out and murder everyone fast, so the fast mana is just not necessary. And I do love the flexibility with the mana rocks. Because we're not going for that quick aggro approach, you could put whatever mana rock you want in here. You know, if Thran Dynamo and Gilded Lotus are your stuff, like that's perfect. That works just fine. If you want to go, you know, Midnight Clock and kind of get into that, literally anything could work. Or even the new one in Kaldheim where it can get enough counters and become 8 mana rocks. I forgot the name. I'll put it up on the screen. Anything works, and this is a fun deck to really test a lot of weird mana rocks out in, just to see how much you like them. But as long as you have a ton, you'll be just fine. And then really outside of mana rocks, there's only one other artifact I want to mention right now, and that is Expedition Map, which again, kind of a no-brainer. But in this deck, typically, I'm not a huge fan of tutoring, but because we need such specific lands, you know, it's cool to just throw a bunch of counters on some basics or some other stuff. But there really are maybe 5, 6, 7 lands in this deck that we really want to be throwing these counters onto. And the deck is already can be kind of slow to get going at a base level, so being able to at least have those lands available is really, really important. So Expedition Map is amazing in here. The enchantments are probably the coolest category in this deck, just because we get to play some really strange and fun cards. Equinox is so damn cool. It's a card I never knew existed, I had never seen before, but it can help basically protect our lands and allow us to counter things. Because when we get that big scary land, we don't want it to get removed. We put a lot of work into that thing. We want it to stick around. We want to be able to punch someone. Terra Eternal is insane. It just makes all lands indestructible. Now, I made a mistake with this. Be careful. If you play this when somebody else has their Cabal Coffers Urborg thing going on, all of a sudden you protected them. So that's not a great thing. But in general, I feel safe playing this early most games, but you do want to be careful. If you have a deck at the table you know is going to be playing a Gaia's Cradle or a Cabal Coffers, maybe hold back on the Terra Eternal and wait till you're going to be on the offensive with your lands. Either way, it's super good in the deck, but it is something you do have to be safe with because it is a universal effect. And then the last really lands matter enchantment in white is going to be Sacred Ground that I wanted to put in here. And this is super cool just because anytime your lands are destroyed, they just come right back. Now, obviously, you're going to lose their counters and different things like that, but it is still such a cool effect to have, and it just makes it a lot more frustrating. If you're swinging with the 6/6, you know, that's a land and someone tries to strip mine it or anything, at least the land's going to come back and it's not going to set you back mana-wise, because that can really, really hurt us in the deck. Now, one of the frustrations about playing Noyan Dar can be how commander dependent it is. Again, a 5 CMC Azorius commander where it has to be out can be a bad time sometimes. So in the enchantment slot, we have 2 more cards that are basically backup commanders for us, with Shark Typhoon and Metallurgic Summonings. Shark Typhoon was such an important card for this deck to be printed because we really have 3 copies of our commander now, in a sense, because we can just flood the board with creatures with all these cantrips and everything. We have tons of instants and sorceries that are either almost free to cast or such little mana to cast, or repeatable effects that we can just keep recasting. And all of a sudden, this makes those matter if our commander gets taxed out, and they're enchantments, so they're harder to remove. So these are huge, huge cards. I know Shark Typhoon's a little on the expensive side, so even just Metallurgic Summonings is fine, but being able to have both really helps, because that redundancy previously was just hard to find in this deck. Now, I mentioned the instants and sorceries. We'll start with the sorceries, but combined, there are 40 instants and sorceries in this deck, which is just, again, in science terms, a metric butt ton. There is a lot. So we'll start with the sorceries. One of the most important categories, and that's kind of how I'm going to break it down, just because there's so many instants and sorceries, more so than most decks. I really just recommend looking at the deck list for the specifics. Just pull it up and kind of watch it side by side. I will talk about all the categories, but I'll be here for an hour if I talk about all the instants and sorceries, just because each one is important. This is kind of the rare deck where every one I felt I needed in the deck, as opposed to sometimes where you just have normal effects that you're just slotting in. A lot of these I think are super important. So with the sorceries, I think the first category that I love about this deck is going to be the ability to bounce or destroy either non-land creatures or non-land permanents. This is super, super good in this deck. I prefer the bounce effect to the destroy, because our commander is a non-land, so I'd rather it come back to hand than kill it. But these effects are insane, and especially if we get a board of these land creatures, are going to be one-sided board wipes. They're super powerful in here. If you notice at the deck list, I'm not actually even running Cycrypt in this deck, because I just didn't feel like it was necessary to put something like that in here, just to have so many essentially one-sided board wipes already. stuff like Displacement Wave. One of the awesome new cards from Zendikar Rising, you have the Flip board wipe that can act as a land. You can just pick and choose your favorites. I actually had to cut a couple because we have so many options for this type of board wipe. The best one though in this category is Crush of Tentacles. I love this card so much. I run this in every deck I can, just because I just love I love the concept of casting a board wipe and everything's gone, and then you end up with an 8/8 octopus, and you might just have some crazy land creatures on top of it. You have this ocean army ready to just punch people all across their faces, and it is so cool. I do think while other ones might be slightly more effective because we have so many low CMC cantrips and stuff like that, Crush of Tentacles is just insane because the surge cost is going to be super easy to get in this deck. Two of the most important sorceries though are going to be Slip Through Space and Artful Dodge, and this kind of represents a category of cards both in the instance and the sorceries that either give our commander, or give a creature I should say, mostly these land creatures, unblockable or flying or some sort of evasion, and in some cases either a flashback or act as a cantrip. These are insane because it's literally 1 mana, draw a card, throw 3/+1 counters. Okay, this land's also unblockable. There have been games where I've been able to play this where all hope seems lost and oh, I just drew a Slip Through Space, cantrip, land gets bigger, now it's unblockable. I drew into another instant or sorcery, make it even bigger, and you can just kill someone. These are the all-stars of the deck, and especially the fact that some of them are repeatable makes it so much scarier, because we'll get to some in the instant, but normally, you know, playing something to give it unblockable and flashing it back doesn't matter. You can't make it double unblockable, but you can't cast more spells, meaning stuff just gets spiraling out of control, and for 2 mana 6/+1 counters is crazy. So this is the type of deal where the impact of these I think can only be felt once you play them and you realize how game breaking they can be. Now with the instance, I wanted to run a lot of brainstorm / anticipate type effects as opposed to just the super heavy counter spells. I do run a decent number of counter spells, I think in the 5 to 7-ish range of the current deck list. But again, like I always talk about in my videos, I really like having the flexible counter spells like Mystic Confluence, Sublime Epiphany, that style of counter spell, because when I'm playing this deck, I didn't build it super controlly, like I said, so I'm not in a position to just be telling everyone no and be able to deal with that blowback. So I don't want to just be countering everybody's stuff making enemies. I want to be able to pick and choose my spots. So, you know, if someone tries to kill my commander, Mystic Confluence, I'll counter it. If not, I'm just going to draw some cards, pump a land, and do that type of stuff. And that's where a lot of these, especially in the instant category, fit into, because in this deck, they're actually kind of like combat tricks. So being able to have that Mystic Confluence in hand, the flexibility to have it as a combat trick or protection, to me, is better than just having a counter spell in hand. There are 3 instances, though, that are just my favorites. I have to point these out specifically because they are so damn cool in this deck that I just get excited every time I draw them and play them. The first one is going to be Vanish into Memory. This card is insane because basically you can remove something, you draw cards equal to its power, and then on your next upkeep it comes back, you discard equal to its toughness. In a pinch, this is an awesome removal spell to protect you, which is not a bad thing. But one of the coolest things about it is when you use it on your lands, because all of a sudden you get a big land, maybe it's going to get removed, something like that. You can protect it, basically make it disappear, draw a whole crap ton of cards, and then it comes back with no toughness. You don't discard anything. The flexibility of this card, the insane card advantage of this card is just such an awesome interaction that I feel like doesn't come up a ton. And yeah, it is an all-star in this deck and can be used so versatilely. Versatile. Whatever version of versatile I'm going for, you know what I'm trying to say. It can be used in a lot of ways, and it is awesome. My second favorite instant in this deck that, again, I just want to point out is View from Above. This fits into that category before of cards that can give evasion, and this is just, this card, the first time I got to do the whole cast it multiple times thing, my mind kind of broke. Got super excited, and I definitely thought I was cheating. Because basically what this card lets you do is you cast it, and if you control a white permanent, it just goes back to your hand. So for 2 mana, you give something flying, bounce it back to hand. Well, it just so happens our commander is a white permanent. So if we have our commander out for however much mana we can have, we can just keep casting this, comes back to hand, cast it again, comes back to hand. And all of a sudden, one of our lands is just going to be insanely massive. We can literally go late game from just like a 3/3 land to something that's swinging for lethal with flying. And the fact that our commander gives these lands haste in addition makes it that much scarier, because we can have no board state, have this in hand late game with a bunch of mana, make a flying lethal flyer out of nowhere and just punch face, and that is just so damn cool. But the single coolest instant in this deck, and the card that I am so excited I get to play because of this commander, is Teferi's Response. And no, it is not Teferi's Protection, because even every time I read it, I think about Teferi's Protection. Teferi's Response is a weird card that says it's going to counter any spell or ability that tries to destroy one of your lands. Now, keyword, it has to destroy specifically, so it can't kill it or exile it in different ways. But if any spell or ability tries to destroy one of your lands, you counter it. And if that ability came from a permanent, you destroy that permanent. But that's not all. Plus you get to draw 2 cards. This card is I think I've had this fire off once so far. It was the best damn feeling I've had playing Magic in a very long time. I was so excited because it's just such a cool card. It's not something you're going to see much, and the value is insane. Like if somebody tries to use the fact that you blow up their permanent, stop your thing from getting destroyed, and then you know what, just draw 2 cards on top of it, and then in addition throw more +1 counters. So not only did I say no, you're not going to kill my land, it's going to get bigger, I'm going to draw more cards, and I'm petty, so I'm going to remember it too. But like I said, tons of awesome utility in that instant slot, so definitely check out the deck list. So jumping into the lands, that's really going to be the most exciting and important category in this deck, because this is what we're trying to pump up and punch people with. Like I said before, we can punch people with a basic, but not quite as much style. I want to get some style points, throw some +1 counters on some other stuff. So the first category of lands in this that are really going to be the most important are the indestructible lands, so stuff like Cascading Cataracts and Darksteel Citadel. These are really, really important cards because if we can get that Darksteel Citadel out early, throw it on there, we can just pile +1 counters on it and feel pretty safe. When it comes to an indestructible land creature, really, what are I think Swords and Path are the only 2 cards I can think of that really can get rid of it, because most exile effects are for non-land permanents. Very rarely can you just exile a permanent. So maybe they have an Ulamog or a Swords or a Path or something like that to get rid of it. But most times that thing is safe. It's really hard to get rid of, and they end up having to use their best removal spell on it anyway, which means your other big threats are even safer. So these are really good, and these are the best to have out early game because you feel much safer. Because it's a real feel bad when you get this massive land creature, board wipe, it dies, and you get set back with lands, which is always scary. This makes you feel just that little bit safer. I also really love lands that can animate themselves. So stuff like Fairy Conclave and Celestial Colonnade. These are really important because it gives us that extra power toughness just in case we need it. So, you know, if we have lands that we're throwing +1 counters on, they can give themselves flying in this case. They can go ahead and get that little bit of an extra bump. And these are also really good targets to throw counters on because that ability to animate themselves makes sure we have lands available to punch with, really. And that's a nice thing to have because our commander's not always available. We need some backups like that in here. And now we have 2 lands that are going to be in the game winning step, but the last one I want to talk about right now is going to be Teleria West. Again, it's a land tutor. And you probably don't hear me talk about tutors much at all in most of the deck techs because I'm not a huge tutor guy. But in this deck, I really think land tutors are important if I haven't said it enough already. Definitely try to get a Teleria West in there because we do want to make sure that early game we can get that indestructible land or get one of those win cons late because it's hard to win with this deck, and you really got to have that. When you get that moment, you really just got to go ahead and take it. But yeah, outside of that, you're just playing whatever you want at 2-color mana base. You can go as deep into duels or basics or whatever it is you want. You're going to have your colors most of the time. It's a very blue heavy deck, so we're going to lean harder into islands than plains. But the mana base itself is easy to hit your colors. It's just those utility lands we got to focus on. All right, so that is going to do it for all the categories. Now let's get into the best part of every deck tech. And for this case, the stompiest part, the splashiest part, the landiest part. It's the game winning step. Let's see how we're about to win the game with our boy Noyan Dar. Now, there's a lot of different ways we can go about, but we got to start with the most obvious, and that is to pump up a land and just punch someone with it. And that to me is the most fun way. It's a very Timmy way to go. We just want to get one land giant, maybe give it evasion, and just start swinging. We want to be swinging everywhere. If someone's got a blocker, good, throw it in front. If not, it's coming to your face. Phrasing. And it's going to be super, super fun. I think it is just such a great way to go about building an instant sorcery based deck in that I guess it's a very me way to do it. Even though we're spell slinging, doing all this crazy stuff, we still just want to punch someone. It's kind of still the goal of the deck, and it's a very, very fun way to win. But now let's get into the next way to win the game. And it's kind of the same, but a little bit different. I do have some more late game finisher type ways to kind of win, not necessarily out of nowhere, but kind of out of nowhere. So the second way to win the game is actually a combo that I put in here. And it's a strange combo, but it's fun. So it's with the card Griffin Canyon. And Griffin Canyon basically reads that when you tap it, you can untap a Griffin and give it +1/+1. Now, I realize this is not yet in itself a Griffin, but we can change that. So once our commander is able to animate this into a creature, we can then cast the Wings of Vela's Veil, which will give it all creature types, maybe 4/4 base power, toughness, and flying. So it's going to be a flying Griffin, and then we can then tap it to untap itself and basically do this little loop to make it an infinitely large Griffin land that we can swing at somebody with flying. Now, you can definitely throw more redundancies. I want this to be more of a very seldom rare way to win in this deck and just kind of out of nowhere fun. So I didn't put any other ways to change creature types in here. I just want it to be this one card. And the reason why I picked Wings of Velas Veil is because it's really good in the deck outside of this combo. We can turn one of our lands into a base 4/4, so basically give it a power toughness boost of 4 and give it flying. So it does give evasion. It does everything we want in this deck, really outside of cantripping already, and it just so happens to combo with Griffin Canyon. So it's a cool, you're not going to see it much, but when it does go off, it's going to be crazy and I think super fun. So this is a really good backup win con, especially against those life gain decks. Calling you out, Danny. If we have any life gain decks going on and someone's got 200 life, 300 life, this is a really cool way to kind of counter that and still have a late game win con. Now, the next way to win the game is going to be another kind of late game. We really need to pull something out. How are we going to do it? And this is going to be based off of instants and sorceries in our graveyard. I really wanted to find other ways to benefit from the fact that we're playing, again, a poop ton of instants and sorceries. We have so many instants and sorceries. So we need to benefit off, just incidentally off of that. So there's two cards that I really think can be payoffs late game if other strategies kind of don't start working for you. One is one of my all-time favorite cards, Rise from the Tides. This is just a cool card where you cast it and you get 2/2 zombies equal to the number of instants and sorceries in your graveyard. If you play this deck and you get into the late game, late turns where you've been playing all these cantrips and everything like that, you can easily have 10-15 instants and sorceries in your graveyard and all of a sudden just flood the board with zombies, all of the pun intended. Like, this is going to be a situation where you might seem hopeless, all of a sudden you got lethal on board, and I think that is awesome in here and a really cool effect. And the other card, no surprise, it's also from Innistrad because I just love Innistrad. It's Runechanter's Pike. Runechanter's Pike is going to be insane in this deck because you can go ahead, equip it to one of your lands, pump it plus X+O, where X is the number of instants and sorceries in your graveyard. This can get real scary because these lands that you're making are already getting big, possibly evasive, and this little power bump that you get from this might just be enough to kill someone when you never thought you had a shot otherwise. And now for our weekly trip to Phyrexia. Obviously, you know, it's been a couple weeks. I'm actually very sad about that. We haven't been to Phyrexia in a little bit, but we're going to make up for it now. And it's the single card that inspired me to put this deck together. It is one of the most beautiful cards ever printed. I love it. It makes me so happy. It's Inkmoth Nexus. Inkmoth Nexus is the best. This card is, it can be basically you pay a mana, turn it into a 1/1 flying artifact creature with infect. We already talked about animating lands, how good this is, but you literally only need 3 instants or sorceries for this to be lethal, and that's all you need. You gotta make it into a creature, 3 instants and sorceries, bam, you can just hit someone for 10 infect. Oh, I love this card. It is perfect for this deck. Again, we have a few land tutors, but this is the stuff you need late game. I mentioned the Griffin Canyon is a weird combo way to win. This kind of falls into that same category, and I mentioned it quite a few times. This deck does not win often, but when it does, these are the type of explosive plays we're gonna use. And yeah, it's infect. Obviously, I had to put it in here. One of my favorite stories so far of playing this deck was actually being killed by my own Inkmoth Nexus because someone Zealous conscripted it, and it was I was brought back home to Phyrexia. I was completed, and it was a good time. And yeah, I think this is the type of deck where I know this is a little on the expensive side. So Inkmoth Nexus, especially if your playgroup doesn't like infect, you don't need it. I mentioned there's plenty of other win cons, but if you are a fellow Phyrexian such as myself, it's no question this has to be in the deck. And that is going to do it for this week's deck tech. I really hope y'all enjoyed it. This is a super fun deck. I definitely think if you've ever been interested, one, give it a shot. The best thing about this deck is it can be built on a crazy budget. Like, I have some expensive cards in here, just that cards that I already had, but 90% of the cards you need in this deck are dirt cheap. Like, you can get everything for 50 cents, a lot of the cards for $1 or less, 50 cents or less. There's really no expensive staples in here. Everything that you really need is on the cheap end. So that is an awesome way to kind of play a weird strategy for cheap. So I'm planning on doing a budget version of it for one of our streams, so keep an eye out for that. I'll post a budget deck list at some point, but this is definitely the type of deck that anybody can give a try. As always, a huge shout out to all the patrons. We love and appreciate y'all so much, and I really hope everybody did enjoy the deck tech. If y'all have any experience with Noyan Dar and there's any cool like pet cards that I missed, definitely let me know. I think it's a super cool deck, and it's something I want to kind of evolve over time, kind of learn new tricks I can use in it. There's also a couple of decks that I'm actively playtesting and trying and tweaking right now that I'm getting ready for deck techs in the coming weeks that I'm crazy excited about, so definitely keep an eye out for those. So much exciting stuff to come. Always make sure to check out our gameplay streams, Commander Petty, every Saturday night at 8:30. We're actually in the process of adding a petty point system. There's going to be some stuff getting added to that I think is going to make it even more fun, so definitely come check it out. So much stuff to come. But until then, I will see y'all next time.